The moon is low over the water off Jamaica when the first cannon flash tears the dark open. Late in October 1720, a small pirate sloop tries to outrun a faster hunter. The pursuing vessel is linked in the Jamaican records to Captain Jonathan Barnett, a private man with a legal commission to take pirates. Some accounts name his sloop as the Tiger. The pirate craft, often identified as William Calico Jack Rackham's, cuts across the chop near Jamaica's western end, where reefs and sudden shallows can save you or kill you. Sailcloth snaps, men shout, and musket shots crack like dry sticks. In the days before this chase, Rackham's crew had been taking small prizes: coastal traders, fishing boats, local sloops. Quick strikes meant to gather food, powder, and a little cash without tangling with a warship. That pattern is important because it shows how narrow their margin was. One unlucky sighting, one fast pursuer, and the whole enterprise collapses. On the pirate deck, two figures do not hang back. Witnesses later say two women fought hard, with pistols and cutlasses, while much of the crew fell into confusion below. Their names, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, would soon circle the Atlantic like smoke from a gun. Half fact, half rumor, fully unforgettable. But here is the question that guides our series. Who were Bonny and Read in the evidence we can actually touch? Trial testimony, court minutes, official correspondence. And who were they in the stories that followed? Especially the famous 1724 book, usually called A General History of the Pyrates. The gap matters, because that gap is where legend grows. Barnett's men close in. A volley rips through the rigging. The sloop lurches, loses way, and the boarding begins. Boots on wet planks, hands grabbing rails, the stink of powder and rum. In the chaos, someone cries for quarter. Someone else refuses. We can anchor this moment with a few hard points. The Jamaican Admiralty court proceedings held at Spanish Town in November 1720. Depositions from captured crewmen describing who fought and who did not, and later reconstructions by historians such as David Cordingley and Colin Woodard who sift the same paper trail. Even so, sources disagree on details of the fight, exact positions, exact words, exact timing. By dawn, the chase ends the same way: prisoners bound, weapons taken, sails slackening in the morning air. And on the deck of a captured pirate sloop, two women wait to be carried into a world that will judge them as criminals, curiosities, and threats all at once. If you'd like more true history stories told this way, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow without changing the past. Next, we step ashore at Nassau, where law breaks down and opportunity rushes in. A man steps off a ship into Nassau's heat and hears it at once. Hammers, laughter, arguments, an improvised town living off stolen wind. To understand Anne Bonny and Mary Read, we first need Nassau, New Providence, around 1715 to 1718. The War of the Spanish Succession has ended, and thousands of sailors who once held privateering commissions find themselves unemployed. The skills are the same: navigation, gunnery, boarding, but the pay is gone. In the Bahamas, Nassau becomes a natural gathering point. A deep harbor, scattered islands for hiding, and sea lanes that funnel merchant traffic between Jamaica, Cuba, Hispaniola, and the American coast. After the 1715 Spanish treasure fleet disaster off Florida, rumors of salvage and plunder draw hard men south. Captains like Henry Jennings appear in reports tied to raids on Spanish salvage camps, and others follow. By 1716 and 1717, the names Benjamin Hornigold, Charles Vane, and Blackbeard Edward Teach are spoken in taverns from Port Royal to Charlestown. Some of these men use Nassau as a base, careening hulls on the beach, dividing prizes, recruiting crews from newly arrived sailors. Life there is not romantic. It is crowded huts, cheap rum, and constant fear of betrayal. A sloop can sail in flying friendly colors, then hoist a black flag at the last moment. Guns are cleaned in doorways. Captains bargain and threaten in the same breath. If Nassau ever looked like a pirate republic, it was a fragile one. More truce than government, more survival pact than ideology. Britain notices. Merchants complain. Governors write anxious letters. In 1718, the Crown sends Woodes Rogers as royal governor to restore order, backed by soldiers, ships, and a proclamation offering the king's pardon to pirates who submit. Rogers lands to find Nassau's defenses weak and its loyalties divided. Some pirates take the pardon. Hornigold most famously becomes a hunter of his former companions, while others slip away into the Cays, choosing flight over surrender. Our evidence here comes in flashes. Rogers's own published account and correspondence, colonial reports from the Bahamas, and later historians, among them Colin Woodard, who trace how war, trade, and geography turned Nassau into a crossroads of crime. In that unstable harbor, a woman arriving from the mainland can disappear into the crowd, and a sailor in a loose shirt can hide more than weapons. Soon, we meet one of those women in the versions we can piece together, Mary Read. A young boy tightens a jacket in a cramped cabin, practicing a voice low enough to pass, because passing keeps food on the table. Mary Read's early life is the hardest to pin down. The fullest narrative comes from a general history of the Pyrates, printed in 1724 under the name Captain Charles Johnson, an author still debated by scholars. That book places her birth in England around the 1690s and claims her mother dressed her as a boy to secure support from relatives. We cannot verify that motive, but the larger idea is plausible. In a hard economy, a change of clothes could become useful armor, shifting how strangers judged you. The same account says Mark Read is sent out as a footboy, then later joins the army in Flanders during the European wars that bleed into the early 18th century. Here the trail turns foggy, no regiment is firmly identified, and scholars caution that later storytellers like dramatic military detail. Still, women passing as men in military settings are documented elsewhere, and the practical incentives are clear. Picture the basics: damp tents, drill calls at dawn, boots sinking into churned mud, a constant test of nerve under shouted orders. In Johnson's version, Mary becomes a capable soldier, then a mounted trooper. She falls for a fellow soldier, reveals her sex to him, and marries. Together they are said to keep an inn, a brief stretch of ordinary life. When her husband dies, Mary again faces the problem she started with: how to earn safely in a world that narrows women's choices. The book has her returning to men's dress, shipping out to the West Indies, and, after an attack at sea, being compelled into pirate company. What can we check against firmer ground? The Jamaican Admiralty Court minutes and depositions from November 1720 place Mary Read on Rackham's crew and describe her presenting in man's clothes while at sea. Those legal records don't preserve her childhood story. They focus on seizures of vessels, threats with arms, and participation in piracy in Jamaican waters. But they do confirm the key point for our narrative. By 1720, Mary had long experience living as a man in environments where exposure could mean violence or death. Modern historians treat Mary's early biography as a mix of plausible fragments and storytelling, useful for direction, dangerous for precision. So we keep our feet on the firm boards, the Caribbean routes, the pirate crews, and the moments where witnesses speak under oath. Because soon Mary will meet a captain whose luck depends on speed, surprise, and a crew that cannot afford hesitation. A young woman in Charlestown turns her head toward the docks, not the parlor, because the ships promise escape. And Bonny's beginnings are even more tangled than Mary Read's. The best-known story again comes through a general history of the Pyrates, which claims, and was born in Ireland around 1690, the child of William Cormac, a lawyer, and his servant Mary Brennan. In this version, scandal pushes the family across the Atlantic to Carolina, where Cormac rebuilds his standing as a merchant and planter near Charlestown. Hard confirmation is scarce. Parish registers and shipping lists do not neatly pin into a single birthplace. So we treat these details as likely, not proven, and we watch what happens next, where the evidence grows firmer. By the 1710s, Charlestown is a busy colonial port. Rice and indigo move outward. Enslaved labor is forced inward. Sailors drift between taverns and wharves. In that setting, Anne is described as strong-willed, quick to anger, and unwilling to accept the narrow script expected of a merchant's daughter. Those personality sketches may be colored by later writers, but the broader context is real. The town's waterfront offered a constant view of men who came and went, who earned cash, and who could vanish. And marries a sailor and small-time informer named James Bonny. Again, We have limited documentation, but the pairing makes sense for the next step. The couple goes to New Providence, drawn by the island's rising trade and its thin enforcement. Nassau in the mid-1710s is a place where names can be remade. A person can arrive with debt and leave with a new crew, a new captain, and a new purpose. Some accounts place, and quickly in the orbit of pirates, men like Benjamin Hornigold's former associates, at a time when pardons and crackdowns are about to reshape everything. If James Bonny cooperates with authorities, as later narratives claim, that would have made Anne's position even more volatile, living beside a man who benefits from the law in a town where the law is a moving target. Evidence anchors here are few but telling. The Spanish town trial record that later lists Anne Bonny among Rackham's crew, contemporary discussions of Nassau's disorder in Woodes Rogers's writings, and the 1724 narrative that supplies much of Anne's early color, for better or worse. However Anne began, by the time we can see her clearly, she is standing at the edge of Nassau's pirate world, close enough to step in and angry enough to do it. Soon, a new governor will arrive with pardons in one hand and cannons in the other. In July 1718, sails appear off Nassau, and the men on shore stop smiling. Woodes Rogers comes in as royal governor with a mission, end piracy in the Bahamas. He brings authority, soldiers, and the promise of the king's pardon for those who surrender. Nassau's harbor, once a refuge, suddenly feels like a trap. Pirates who have lived by speed and intimidation now face paperwork they cannot shoot their way out, though we will mention that only once and move on, because the real story is what the pirates do next. Rogers's arrival splits the pirate community. Some captains read the wind and take the pardon. Benjamin Hornigold is the most famous example, later turning pirate hunter, chasing men he once drank with. Others resist. Charles Vane refuses to submit, famously using a captured ship as a fire ship to cover his escape from the harbor, an act that shows both cunning and desperation. Men who stay in Nassau must choose, become respectable, or become prey. This is also when Nassau's taverns change. The loud confidence of the pirate republic thins into suspicion. Former comrades inform on one another. Crews scatter to the out islands. The sea lanes around New Providence become watched, and that pressure pushes pirates toward riskier waters, along Cuba's northern coast, into the Windward Passage, and back toward Jamaica, where merchant traffic is rich but patrols are deadly. Where is Anne Bonny in this storm? We cannot place her with certainty on a specific day in 1718, but the environment around her is sharply documented. Rogers writes about the fragile state of the settlement and his effort to restore control. Colonial reports describe the same fear and the same opportunism, and the later trial record in Jamaica will show that within 2 years, Anne is attached to a pirate crew that chose defiance over surrender. In this climate, a man like John Calico Jack Rackham matters. He is not the biggest name in piracy, but he is exactly the sort of captain Nassau produces: ambitious, restless, and willing to bet everything on a fast sloop. Some accounts say he accepted a pardon and then returned to piracy soon after, a pattern that fits the era when pardons were a doorway, not always an ending. Rogers wants pirates to become subjects again. The pirates want room to breathe. And in the narrow space between those two desires, Rackham begins to gather the people who will make Nassau's Nights infamous. Next, we follow Rackham from the harbor into open water, where style and audacity become a kind of currency. A slim captain in bright cloth steps onto a sloop's deck and smiles like the sea owes him something. John Rackham earns the nickname Calico Jack because contemporaries associate him with calico, cheap, colorful printed cotton that stands out in a world of tar and salt-stained wool. The nickname may be partly later flourish, but Rackham's image is consistent. He cultivates a look, and he wants command. In Nassau, where reputations travel faster than ships, that matters. By 1718 and 1719, piracy is tightening under pressure. Big crews and slow ships are liabilities. Rackham moves with a smaller, quicker sloop, favoring coastal targets, small traders, fishing vessels, lightly armed craft near Cuba and around the Bahamian Islands. The stakes are immediate. If you take too little, the crew deserts. If you take too much, a warship comes looking. So Rackham's raids are often quick, a burst of muskets, a boarding party, a few barrels of food, a spare sail, and then back into open water before alarms spread. This is where Anne Bonny's story locks into the firmer record. By 1720, court documents in Jamaica list her as a member of Rackham's crew. How she joins him is described most fully by a general history of the Pyrates. And, trapped in a marriage she despises, takes Rackham as a lover and chooses the sea over respectability. The book adds dramatic details, arguments, threats, and a break with James Bonny that are difficult to confirm. But the core movement fits Nassau's reality. People did leave spouses, cut ties, and vanish in a cruise, aboard a pirate sloop, and is not a passenger. Later testimony and later narrative alike portray her carrying arms and taking part in raids. That does not mean equality. Pirate crews could be brutal, and a woman's presence created risk. Yet pirates also prized usefulness. If and could fight, keep discipline, and share danger, she could earn a place others would deny her. Rackham's crew forms in this mix of desire and necessity. A captain gathers men who are willing to live by sudden violence, and he needs people who won't fold under pressure. The evidence anchors here are clear enough to name: the Spanish town proceedings that list the crew, depositions that describe the raids and the capture, and the 1724 narrative that supplies much of the personal drama, which historians treat cautiously. On a night watch, with Nassau's lights fading behind them, Rackham's sloop points toward the Caribbean lanes, and soon another figure will step aboard, dressed as a man and carrying a past that few on deck can read. A new hand comes aboard in plain clothes, head down, voice steady, trying not to draw the wrong kind of attention. Sometime before the autumn of 1720, Mary Read enters the orbit of John Rackham's crew. Exactly how she joins is uncertain, and the uncertainty is part of the story. A general history of the Pyrates gives the most detailed version. Mary, dressed as a man, is taken on as a sailor and then as a pirate, her sex unknown to most of the crew. The Jamaican Admiralty Court record confirms Mary's presence, but does not preserve the full recruitment tale. It simply treats her as a pirate in company with Rackham. On a small sloop, a newcomer is judged fast. Can you reef a sail in rain? Can you hold a musket steady on a rolling deck? Can you climb into a prize boat at night without slipping? Mary's earlier life, however we reconstruct it, has trained her for exactly these tests. She moves in a male world by matching its skills and its hardness, and by keeping her private truth carefully hidden. When Rackham hunts, he favors surprise. The sloop can drift close in the half-light, flying friendly colors until the last moment. Then the flag changes, the guns are run out, and the crew rushes over the rail. The target is often small: a coastal trader hugging the Cuban shore, a Jamaican fishing boat, a little vessel carrying hides, tobacco, or barrels of food. The victims are bound, threatened, stripped of weapons, and left with their lives, because murder brings heavier pursuit, and Rackham needs time to slip away. Later narrative sources add a famous scene, and Bonny, thinking Mary a young man, is said to show interest. Mary then reveals her sex to Anne, and soon after to Rackham. It is a tidy piece of drama, too tidy to accept without caution. Still, it captures a real tension. Two women on a pirate ship face double danger: violence from enemies and exposure within their own crew. If they survive, it is not by luck alone. It is by choosing who to trust and by being ready to fight. Trial depositions from Spanish Town hint at that readiness. Witnesses describe Bonny and Read as very active during attacks and, in some accounts, as among the last ones resisting when the crew faltered. Whether every detail is accurate, the pattern is consistent. These were not passengers swept along by a captain's will. They were participants in armed robbery at sea. Historians who compare the trial minutes with later retellings often note the same contrast. The court is blunt, the book is vivid. With Mary aboard, Rackham has something rare: a compact crew that includes two fighters who understand disguise, discipline, and the price of being underestimated. Now the sloop turns toward the shipping lanes off Cuba and Jamaica, where quick raids can bring quick rewards and quicker pursuit. A merchant sloop spots a sail on the horizon and relaxes, until the strangers turn toward her with sudden speed. By mid-1720, Rackham's crew is living the pattern that keeps small pirate bands afloat: frequent, modest captures. They rarely take a prize large enough to make them famous, but they take enough to keep going: food, powder, cloth, tools, a little coin when they find it. Along the Cuban coast and in the waters around Jamaica, a fast sloop can appear from behind a point of land, strike, and vanish before a patrol ship arrives. Some accounts, including later narratives, credit Rackham with capturing larger vessels around 1719, one often named the Kingston, followed by a swift counterattack by Jamaican privateers that forced him to abandon the prize. The precise details are debated, but the lesson is clear and consistent with the period. A pirate's success is fragile. Even a big win can turn into a running fight, a grounded hull, and a desperate escape through mangroves. When Rackham's attacks go well, they look almost routine. The pirates come alongside under cover of friendly flags. Muskets rise. A few shots are fired into the air or into the rigging. A boarding party climbs over, pistols out, cutlasses ready. The victim's captain is dragged to the deck, questioned, threatened, and forced to surrender what the pirates want. In trial depositions, captured seamen later describe being robbed of weapons, money, and clothing. Their boats are searched, their cargo is sampled and stripped, and sometimes a spare sail or a compass is taken as eagerly as coin. Often the victims are sent on with their vessel intact, shaken but alive, because dead men bring louder haunts. And Bonny and Mary Read appear in this phase as working pirates, armed, active, and visible. Later writers make them exceptional, and in some ways they were, but we should notice the ordinary details too. The sweat of hauling lines, the salt burn in the eyes, the long hours with nothing but water and sky, and then the abrupt violence when a sail comes into range. Evidence anchors for this high point come mostly from the Spanish town proceedings and depositions that list specific thefts and threats, supported by the broader context found in Woodes Rogers's reports on piracy's decline and in modern syntheses by historians who map pirate movements across the Bahamas and Jamaica. The paperwork is dry, but the action it points to is sharp. For a brief season, Rackham's crew believes speed and nerve will always be enough. Then the cracks begin: drink, arguments, loose talk in coastal taverns, and patrols that start to anticipate their route. At anchor in a quiet Jamaican bay, laughter rises from the deck, and that is exactly what gets them noticed. Piracy does not end with a single battle, it ends with attention. By 1720, the Bahamas and the Northern Caribbean are filled with men who have reasons to hunt pirates. Governors protecting trade, private captains chasing rewards, merchants demanding action. Every raid Rackham makes creates witnesses, and every witness tells a slightly different story in a tavern, on a wharf, or in a portside courthouse. The details spread: a small sloop, a captain known for Calico, and 2 crew members remembered for fighting hard and refusing to yield. Inside the crew, strain builds. A small band must keep discipline without the fearsome aura that Edward Teach once used like a weapon. Several accounts connected to Rackham's capture suggest some of his men drank heavily, especially when they thought the coast was clear. Whether the crew was truly drunk and asleep in the final moments is debated, but the broader point is hard to miss. When pirates start believing their own luck, they take risks that erase the one advantage they have: readiness. There are also practical problems. Food spoils. Powder gets damp. A sail tears and must be patched. A sloop needs careening, hauled onto a beach to scrape weeds from the hull. Otherwise she slows down, and speed is life. The more time Rackham spends close to shore, the easier he is to corner. And the longer he lingers near Jamaica, the more likely local authorities hear of him, because Jamaica is not an empty frontier. It is a busy island with plantations, ports, fishing grounds, and patrol craft that move between coves and harbors. And Bonny and Mary Read remain visible in the sources at this stage mostly as names tied to the crew and, in later retellings, as the ones who kept their heads while others lost theirs. Here we should be careful. It is tempting to turn them into pure heroes inside a pirate story. The court record does not do that. It calls them pirates. Still, witness statements about their activity and attacks, and the fact that their presence was memorable enough to be repeated, suggests they were not hiding below decks when danger came. Evidence anchors here include the Spanish town depositions describing raids and threats, official Jamaican efforts to suppress pirates in 1720, and the 1724 narrative that amplifies the crew's disorder into a cautionary tale. Modern historians tend to split the difference. Alcohol likely played a role, but overconfidence and shrinking safe harbors mattered just as much. By late October, the crew's need for rest and repair collides with the sea's habit of bringing unwanted visitors. And in the dark off Jamaica, a commissioned hunter closes the distance, gun by gun. The shoreline is close enough to smell wood smoke, wet sand, and mangroves, and the crew decides to stay one more night. By the time Rackham's sloop circles back toward Jamaica in October 1720, the choices are narrowing. Open sea offers room to run, but it offers fewer easy targets. Jamaica offers prizes everywhere, small traders hugging the coast, fishing boats bringing catch to market, sloops moving between bays. It also offers patrols, informants, and the quickest path from pirate deck to prison cell. Rackham's critical decision is not a grand speech. It is a habit. He keeps operating near the island even as the net tightens. Accounts tied to the capture place the crew at anchor or drifting close to shore, taking rest, and perhaps celebrating recent thefts. The exact bay varies by retelling, but many point to waters near Negro, on Jamaica's western edge, a region of coves and reefs where a small sloop can hide, and where a hunter can still find you if he knows where to look. On deck, ordinary pirate life continues. Someone cleans a pistol. Someone patches a seam with a needle. Someone argues about whether to risk another raid before daylight. The crew's strength, confidence, and familiarity turns into weakness. Men who have lived by sudden action now move slowly. Watchfulness slips. A boat that should have been kept ready to flee is left with its oars loose and its lines untended. And Bonny and Mary Read, in later testimony and later narrative, stand out at this moment for the same reason they will stand out in court. When the crew relaxes, they do not. If we trust the depositions, they are among those who seize weapons first when danger appears. If we trust the 1724 narrative, they curse the men who hide and demand a fight. The truth may sit between those versions, but both point in the same direction. At the decisive moment, these women act. Evidence anchors for this decision come from the Spanish town court minutes naming the place and date range, from depositions describing the crew's state at the time of capture, and from contemporary newspaper notices in the British Atlantic that report Rackham's taking and the unusual presence of two women among the prisoners. Somewhere beyond the dark line of the reef, another sail is moving. Captain Jonathan Barnett, operating with legal authority, has heard enough to take a chance on this stretch of coast. He closes in carefully, keeping his distance until his guns can speak. The cold open of our story is no longer in the future. It is approaching fast, carried by wind and intent. And when the first shots flash over the water, Rackham's crew discovers how little time one more night really buys. A lantern swings between two hulls as the night turns from chase to capture. It is the night of October 22nd, 1720, in waters the trial papers describe as roughly a league from Negril Point, Jamaica. Jonathan Barnett, sailing under legal authority, brings his sloop close and calls out across the dark. In testimony later printed with the proceedings, he says he asked the stranger to identify itself. The reply, John Rackham from Cuba, is almost a confession. Barnett orders the pirate to strike his colors. Someone on Rackham's deck answers with a swivel gun shot, and Barnett responds with a cannon broadside and musket fire that splinters the pirate sloop's boom and steals her speed. Some accounts add that Rackham's crew had been entertaining local turtlers with punch not long before the fight. One more sign of how relaxed they had grown. Whether every cup and laugh is remembered accurately, the broader point is firm. The pirates are caught close to shore, not in open water with room to vanish. After that, the fighting is cramped and fast. Rigging whips, powder smoke hangs low, and the sea slaps both hulls together as Barnett closes. Several later statements suggest many of Rackham's men quickly beg for quarter once they feel the ship's damage. But the same record also preserves the detail that makes this capture echo for centuries. Witnesses describe two crew members who keep resisting on the open deck, and Bonny and Mary Read, moving with pistols and cutlasses while others retreat below. Barnett's men board. There is no grand, clean duel, just grappling hands, a pistol knocked aside, a blade kicked across wet planks. One by one, pirates are hauled into lamplight and tied. The printed trial narrative and later summaries disagree on small counts, but the core is stable. Rackham is taken with his crew, and the two women are taken with him. The prisoners are put ashore on Jamaica's northwest coast and handed to militia custody, then marched inland. The road to Spanish Town runs through heat, scrub, and settlements that depend on the trade ships the pirates have been preying on. At sea, Rackham could change flags and vanish into reefs. On land, names are written down, witnesses are summoned, and mercy becomes a legal argument. By the time the group reaches Spanish Town, the chase is over, but the real pressure is only beginning. Next comes confinement, questioning, and the slow realization that the most dangerous weapon now is not a cannon, but a witness willing to talk. A heavy door shuts in Spanish Town, and the sea becomes a memory you can't reach. The pirates are held in Jamaica while the authorities build cases. Spanish Town is inland, hot, and watched. The prisoners are separated, guarded, questioned. Iron scrapes on stone, flies circle the water buckets, and every footstep in the corridor sounds like a verdict. In piracy trials, details matter. Which vessel was attacked, who carried arms, who threatened witnesses, who could identify a face in the dark. So the days fill with statements taken from victims and from captured crewmen, each trying to reduce his own danger by giving the court what it wants. For Anne Bonny and Mary Read, confinement has a particular edge. At sea, their male clothing and sailors' habits help them blend into a crew. In custody, they are examined as curiosities as well as criminals. Women who fought, women who boarded, women who broke the expectations of a British colony built on strict roles. Contemporary interest is real. The combined trial will be described as highly publicized because of their sex. Outside the prison walls, Jamaica is impatient. Merchants want the sea lanes cleared. Local officials want an example made. Governor Nicholas' laws and other authorities correspond about piracy as a practical threat to trade and security. Inside, the crew feels time compress. Some men try to shift blame upward. The captain ordered it, while others insist the whole crew shared in the taking. A few details repeated in the record are plain and ugly. Firearms pointed at unarmed sailors, boats stripped of their weapons, and threats meant to freeze resistance before it starts. The women's names appear alongside men's in these preparations, not as mascots, but as participants. A witness later recorded in the proceedings, Dorothy Thomas, is said to have recognized Bonny and Read during attacks, describing them as active in the robberies. That kind of identification matters, because piracy is not simply being near a pirate ship, it is joining in the violence that takes property by fear. In the cell, rumor replaces horizon. Rackham's trial comes first. The men know that convictions can lead quickly to execution at gallows point. Bonny and Read also know something else. Whatever sympathy a spectator might feel, the court's language is hard, and the colony's appetite for deterrence is strong. When the courtroom doors finally open, the pirates will step from shadow into bright, formal judgment, and the women will learn how little room there is to explain themselves. In the courtroom at Spanish Town, the words are calm, but every sentence points toward a rope. On November 28, 1720, Anne Bonny and Mary Read are brought before Jamaica's Admiralty Court at Spanish Town. The charges follow the pattern used against Rackham's crew: acts of piracy at sea, taking vessels by force, and threatening those who resisted. They plead not guilty, an expected move when the only alternative is immediate condemnation. The room itself is a reminder of who holds power. Soldiers stand at the edges. Spectators lean forward when the women enter, because even in a colony accustomed to brutality, the idea of female pirates draws attention. Bonny and Read answer questions with the economy sailors use at sea: few words, steady faces. The court, however, is not interested in personality. It is interested in whether each attack can be tied to each defendant, where it happened, what was taken, and who was seen carrying arms. Witnesses are called. Some describe being stopped in small boats along the Jamaican coast. Others speak of being boarded, searched, robbed, and sent away shaken. The record names at least one witness, Dorothy Thomas, who testified that she saw Bonny and Read with weapons during attacks and recognized them again in custody. It is the kind of testimony colonies rely on, a face, a voice, a remembered threat, brought into court under oath. The women are not tried for being unusual. They are tried for specific actions, going in company with pirates, bearing arms, and helping to seize property. The evidence anchors come in quick succession: depositions, identifications, brief questioning. The proceedings are later printed and circulated, and that printed trials text becomes a core document historians return to when separating courtroom fact from later storytelling. The verdict is guilty. Sentencing follows the grim script. Bonny and Read are condemned to hang, just as Rackham and the men had been. Yet here the record takes a turn that is both intimate and brutally practical. Both women plead the belly, claiming pregnancy. The court orders an examination by a jury of matrons to determine whether they are quick with child, and executions are stayed. It is not a pardon. It is a legal pause rooted in the idea that an unborn child should not die for the mother's crime. And it buys time, days, weeks, months, in a world where time is the rarest commodity. As the courtroom empties, Bonny and Read return to prison with their sentences suspended, while outside the gallows waits for the rest of Rackham's crew. A body swings at gallows point, and the warning is meant to travel farther than any ship. Rackham and most of his crew are tried first. In mid-November 1720, Jamaica's Admiralty Court moves quickly, and on November 18th Rackham is executed at what locals call Gallows Point. Later retellings add a sharp detail: Rackham asking to see and Bonny answering with cold anger. But the courtroom record itself is quieter: conviction, sentence, hanging. What is well supported is the intent to make an example. Bodies could be displayed near the shore so passing crews would see what waits at the edge of Jamaica. For Bonny and Read, pleading the belly changes the calendar. The stay of execution keeps them in prison while examinations and legal pauses run their course. Here, uncertainty rises. We know the mechanism existed, and we know both women used it successfully because it is recorded in the trial accounts. Whether both were truly pregnant is harder to prove. Some historians suspect at least one may have used the plea as a last delay, knowing pregnancy was difficult to disprove quickly in a colonial jail. Mary Read does not leave custody alive. Burial registers in Jamaica include an entry for her interment on April 28, 1721 at St. Catherine's Parish, and major reference works report that she died in prison that spring, often described as a fever. If she was pregnant, the record does not preserve what happened to the child, and that silence has fueled speculation ever since. What remains solid is that her story ends behind walls, not on a quarterdeck. And Bonny's trail, by contrast, fades into blur. The court record tells us she was convicted and her execution stayed. After that, documentation becomes thin. Some later claims suggest she was released, possibly through family influence, and returned to the American mainland. Others keep her in the Caribbean. Museums and historians regularly note that her later life cannot be pinned down with the same certainty as the trial. So the immediate aftermath is uneven. One woman has a burial record, the other vanishes from the page. And as soon as the evidence thins, rumor grows stronger, carried by sailors, repeated in newspapers, and reshaped in each telling. The next stage of Nassau Nights will not happen on the sea at all, but in print, where writers decide what kind of women Bonny and Read are allowed to be. A book opens in London, and Nassau's Gunsmoke turns into ink. In 1724, a work published under the name Captain Charles Johnson appears, A General History of the Pyrates. It does not invent Anne Bonny Mary Read, but it reshapes them. It supplies childhood scenes, private conversations, and neat explanations that the Spanish town court record never attempts. For many readers, Johnson becomes the source, not the trial. And once a story is built for the bookstall, the sharp edges of evidence are smoothed, while the empty spaces are filled with certainty. If we step back to the hard anchors, the Jamaican Admiralty proceedings of 1720, the printed 1721 trial accounts, and the witness identifications, the women look less like mythic exceptions and more like working pirates in a small crew, present in raids, armed during seizures, and treated by the court as criminals, not as symbols. The Library of Congress's summary of the trial highlights how public attention focused on their sex, while the charges and testimony stayed focused on their actions. And yet, their legacy is real. They endure because they disrupt expectations. They show that the pirate world, brutal and overwhelmingly male, could still contain women who navigated it by disguise, skill, and a willingness to use violence. Modern museum and reference summaries stress the same sober fact. After the stay of execution, Read dies in prison in April 1721, while Bonny's later life is uncertain, leaving an opening that later writers eagerly occupied. The later tradition piles on images, two women as perfect foils, one fiery, one disciplined, a last cutting line to Rackham, a secret escape, a quiet retirement. Some of those details may preserve fragments of truth. Others are likely inventions that fit what audiences wanted, drama with clear endings. The honest approach is to keep the map visible. We can point to Negril Point, Spanish Town, and the dated proceedings. We can name the plea of pregnancy. We can note the burial register. And then we can admit, plainly, where the evidence ends. So what survives when we strip away romance? A night off Jamaica, a broken boom, a court that wrote names in ink, and two women who, whatever their private reasons, took part in piracy and paid for it in fear and confinement. If you enjoyed this series, a like or a quiet subscribe is the simplest way to tell me to make more history like this. And the next time you hear Anne Bonny and Mary Read invoked as pure legend, listen for the courtroom voices beneath the waves, plain, sworn, and still hard to ignore.